Um, Thank you very much for having me today. I'm here to talk also about Work Package 4 and follow on from Sophie's work about stepping stones, really, but from the human dimension. But before I do, I just wanted to follow on from what Pip said earlier on, which was that in the early days before Ecostructure, it was really hard to get buy-in from all the partners that they wanted to get buy-in from. And I was lucky enough in those really early days, pre-ALI, pre-Ecostructure, to be involved with Pip and Louise in the concept of their Ecostructure ideas. And as a commercial partner on ALI's project, there seemed to me to be this huge disconnect between people and what people wanted, the public, what the conservation agencies wanted, and also what the academics wanted to research. So I sort of pushed for this chapter of Ali's PhD, which was the bane of her life for quite a while, to try and assess or find common ground in what people actually wanted in ecostructures. And today I'm here to talk to you about stakeholder engagement. And I really think that projects like Ecostructure have actually offered the opportunity to move beyond stakeholder engagement and actually into more participatory approaches where actually the partners and stakeholders are part of the science now. You're not just engaging and outreaching. And that's a really important thing to remember. So today I'm talking specifically about biosecurity and invasive non-native species, following on from Morag and stepping stone concept. So I'm going to talk about why it's important this work was added onto Ecostructure, and also about how we worked with marina operators and then marina users. So why research non-natives species and biosecurity? These were sort of the three main objectives or areas of Work Package 4, and I came in on this one, number 2, which was supposed to be developing biosecurity devices and protocols for ports and marinas. And why was this? Well, we know that people at ports and marinas, well, boats move around the Irish Sea. There's a lot of movement around the Irish Sea, but we also know that with boats go species in ballast waters or on hulls or even in like bait boxes on boats. And we also know from some pathways assessments that once things are introduced to the country, that boating is one of the most prolific spreaders of non-native species, and that marinas actually act as these hotspots, as you can see. The areas around marinas are actually hotspots for invasive non-native species, which compared to shellfish gathering, production, and offshore activities is actually a much bigger sort of problem, a more widespread problem. So at first, Ecostructure's idea was, well, we're going to work with marina operators and explore the perceptions of like what kind of biosecurity interventions we can actually implement with marinas. And they were talking about like hard interventions, like quarantine berths. So a vessel comes in to berth in a marina, and we'll wrap it up in plastic and bleach it and clean it off before it's allowed to berth. Or having rotating pontoons that are very fancy, very expensive, and you will rotate the pontoon to slough off any invasives that have brought in and hopped on. So that was the concept behind my predecessor's, Siobhan's work, was to talk to marina operators about influencing. She managed to speak to 9 marinas around the Irish Sea. She ran workshops with 7 in the end, in final workshops. She had representatives from many stakeholders and natural resources Wales about what they wanted, biosecurity experts about what they wanted, and 6 Ecostructure researchers. And these were marina managers, and they worked in operations, so they were really interested in the barriers and perceptions of implementing these things. And she published this work in 2020, and the main conclusions, there were a few conclusions, but one of the main conclusions, apart from it's very hard to implement biosecurity without clear legislation that people have to do things, which at the moment is not, the recreational industry. There's no legislation to make people do things. That there's a lack of guidance on how to implement biosecurity. But one of the most concerning things was that marina operators were not convinced by the effectiveness of any of the education materials that they were being asked to push out to their users. And what's more, that by pushing out biosecurity education to their clients, actually it may make them less preferential to their clients. They were worried about putting people off by information overload. On top of that, there's a lot of information going out to boaters about all kinds of things: safety, biosecurity, environmental, climate change. So before they really would be willing to really push biosecurity in marinas, they really want evidence that education actually works with their clients and isn't going to put them off. There's a lot of marine education out there being developed. The Check Clean Dry campaign, probably most of you are familiar with. Check your equipment, clean your boots, dry them before you go back in the field, wherever you are, or apply to boats or field equipment. And these messages have been developed very carefully by the Non-Native Species Secretariat in collaboration with a bunch of partners, including people like the Green Blue, Animal and Plant Health Agency, Wales and Natural England, amongst others. So I put my head together with these people and ran some pilots about what kind of work we could do to provide this evidence that marine operators wanted. So the response I got back made me rethink originally what Siobhan had planned for this project, which was basically there was a call to test the efficiency of what already exists, to actually improve people's intent to undertake biosecurity actions with their boats. And this involved actually getting involved these partners and really heavily with the RYA and Cunning surveys out there in the first place. So the kinds of information we're talking about are mainly passive education. So they're not necessarily always interactive. Most education that goes out is boards. So you get printed materials, leaflets, posters, video, which is slightly more engaging, but still passive, education, literature or education material. And then there's workshops, which in theory are interactive education and proven through education research that these will be much more engaging and much more likely to encourage pro-environmental behaviour. Anything that's two-way is going to work better. But getting recreational boaters to come to workshops is half the battle in the first place, or in fact more than half the battle, it proved. So this project aimed to look at these three different types of education, printed video and workshops, and test their effectiveness against a control. And all of these things embedded this check, clean, dry. In terms of what the workshops entailed, they took quite a long time to develop because the project was seeded pre-COVID and then ended up being delivered very late COVID. But we did develop, as a result of COVID, some fantastic new materials through which to really encourage look at materials and engage with them online. And this is one of them. So we use this platform called GatherTown. Some of you will have seen it. We use it with students at University in Bangor, and that's where I got the idea. Everybody has a little avatar. They can move around the screen in this virtual environment. This is actually our welcome arena. So there we give some talks through those call boxes. They go in. They have some talks in a conference setting. They do a pre-workshop questionnaire before we inundate them with information. And then they go through into a virtual marina. So we took some drone footage, we took some VR immersive 360 video, and we immersed that so that as they walked around the marina, they could drop in and accidentally find some wakame, or you could accidentally stumble across some crepidula. So it was very interactive, immersive, and there were facilitators dotted around the marina to talk about what they were seeing. All the messaging was about how amazing positive messaging, so positive normative messaging. So very much like, don't we live in an amazing environment? Look at this super 360 video of this pristine area around, and wouldn't it be nice to protect it? And here's some posters about non-native species, the damage they can cause. It wasn't any sort of negative message. or finger pointing. We also try to make the workshops as fun as we can. So here's Simon and Chloe from NRW and me running some in-person workshops, which we worked with RYA really hard to get people involved at. And in that case, we put our VR headsets on, and actually people could properly look around what lives underneath them. Really immersive. And we had fantastic people. My main question was, I'm running out of time already, can education material change the perceived threat of invasive non-native species or the biosecurity intention of boaters? We looked at boater typologies, for which there's many different types of boaters and the socio-demographics and the type of boating activity they partake in, to work out some clusters and look at their prior understanding of predictors, their attitudes towards biosecurity, and then their perceptions of threat and their actual intention. And we created like a pathway analysis for this, which included the fact that attitudes will affect threats through theories of behavioral change, and that threats and attitudes will affect intention. It's a complicated analysis. We tried to make sure that all the things were measured scale aware of a possible behavior. Statements like this. Lots of advertising. I'm going to give you a 1-minute summary of the outputs. So we're just starting analyzing this. We've come up with sort of these clusters of boat types to help us with the analysis. But you can see that there were clearly two sort of types of boaters that we surveyed. Some of them were boating mainly in saltwater, one group mainly in saltwater, mainly from yachts and cruising vessels, largely male. The other group were more female dominated, more paddlers with canoes, and they tended to use. And these are the sort of headline results coming up.
Cluster 1, which are boaters, tend to have less or lower prior knowledge of invasive non-native species and biosecurity, in red, than the paddling group, which is a useful finding to show where the check, clean, dry messaging is already working.
Out there at the moment, that the attitudes towards invasive non-native species and perceptions of threat were very closely linked, which you'd expect. But also that the video education was actually the most successful and the most significant in changing people's biosecurity intention. You can see this in a slightly different way here. 0 is like our comparison. So you're seeing that at the bottom here, the total effect of biosecurity intention or behavioral intention. Basically, if you add up all the steps of the path and take into account everything else, how effective is each one changing the behavior. And you can see that video is clearly the most successful so far. But it is equally important as perception of threat. And to change those perceptions of actual threat is a very hard job. And it's something that needs a societal change of like social norming, which is much more difficult to achieve than your leaflets and things. All part of the plan, so to speak. Unfortunately, the workshop education, we didn't get enough respondents, which in itself tells us a tale that people just do not want to do workshops. Once they do them, you get fantastic. So if you look at theories of reasoned action, you can see that this cultural change and change in subjective norms is actually needed to change biosecurity. And that comes back to the beliefs, perception of threat that they feel. It's a threat to them, whether it's a threat to them. But something that did also come back was that the partners involved asked that we could make the online workshops available for them ongoing. And so that's what we're trying to do at the moment as an output, because the feedback from people who did come was that they think that it should be a real part of education, even a criteria for membership or birth holding, that they should have to go into this interactive space and explore and be exposed to these things. Also, I did find that actually quantitative work with boaters is incredibly hard, which lots of people have found before. But that's there'll be some publications coming out and some information for biosecurity planners in marinas, but also conservation agencies. And ultimately, hopefully, this project will have a large impact in minimizing the spread of around the Irish Sea. Thank you.